So by now you've probably heard that Nottoway Plantation in Iberville Parish burnt down. Now I've already made a post about it on Facebook, but I haven't gotten around to talking about it on TikTok, so let's get into it. For those who don't know, my family actually comes from a town just north of Nottoway Plantation called Plaquemine. Despite that, there's no significant ties between Nottoway Plantation and my family. With that being said, I do have some vague experience with Nottoway Plantation. Specifically, I used to work for a catering company that set up weddings at Nottoway Plantation. And as far as I remember, I hated doing jobs at Nottoway Plantation, but I don't think I have much right to complain. Let's not sugarcoat it. Nottoway Plantation was built in the twilight of chattel slavery in South Louisiana. Specifically, construction on Nottoway Plantation finished about 6 years before the Emancipation Proclamation. Now, some of you might be saying, well, wouldn't that mean that slavery only existed at Nottoway Plantation for 6 years? No! First and foremost, the Emancipation Proclamation only applied to Confederate states that were not under Union control, meaning it really didn't do much of anything contrary to popular belief. Any area occupied by the Confederacy could just simply ignore it. Which brings me to my second point. Some of you history buffs might be going, wait a minute, didn't the Union conquer the lower river parishes by this point in the war? And you're right. Which also means they were exempted from the Emancipation Proclamation. Meaning if you were enslaved on Nottoway Plantation during the Civil War, the Emancipation wouldn't have done shit for you either way. In fact, if I'm correct, if you actually go read the Emancipation Proclamation, they specifically exempt all the lower river parishes in Louisiana. So even though the Union on paper was fighting for abolition, they really didn't practice it when it convenienced them. Not to mention, at the start of the war in 1961, the military did pass a policy that said that slaves could be held as enemy contraband and forced to work for the Union. Not cool. Yeah, so despite the fact the Civil War was definitely primarily fought over slavery, the Union weren't exactly the white saviors that a lot of people paint them as in Hollywood. Even after the 13th Amendment was ratified, to this day, there is still an exception if someone has been convicted of a crime that is still in practice in most states to this day. And I don't want people in blue states acting like they're all high and mighty on this subject either. All you folks in California literally voted to uphold involuntary servitude not too long ago after giving Louisiana crap for voting down a bill that would have actually made it worse. But the reason I'm telling you all this is because Nottoway Plantation was in the perfect location to educate people about this stuff. Nottoway Plantation was built just before the Civil War kicked off, and it still practiced slavery even after the Union took it over. But from my understanding, the history tours that were given at the plantation did not touch on any of this. Instead, they focused primarily on the lost cause revisionist ideology popularized by Woodrow Wilson. From what I understand, these tours completely glossed over the brutality of slavery, while simultaneously painting the owner of Nottoway Plantation as some type of folk hero. And again, I want to stop all the people in blue states from lecturing us about this because y'all do the same thing at Hearst Castle. William Randolph Hearst was a piece of shit and y'all do not mention a single thing about it at the Hearst Castle tour. Sorry, I really just hate it when pretentious left-wingers from blue states lecture people in Louisiana like they're so high and mighty when they're just as bad. But anyway, that's just touching on the problematic history of Nottoway Plantation and how the owners completely glossed over it when doing tours about the history of the site. Going back to what I said at the beginning of the video, my only experience going to Nottoway Plantation was when I was working for an event catering company that set up weddings there. Look, the house itself was extremely beautiful. The surrounding landscape was extremely beautiful. The view of the Mississippi River from the levees, extremely beautiful. I can see why the setting itself might entice people to have weddings there. At the same time, knowing about all the stuff that went down at places like this, why would you? Now, as a libertarian, I'm not advocating for certain practices to be banned. With that being said, if a plantation glosses over the negative history while letting people host the happiest day of their lives there, that raises a few eyebrows. At this point, lost cause ideology has become the go-to example for revisionist history. 50 years ago, hell, 20 years ago, it would be perfectly understandable to be completely misinformed on this subject. Now it's completely inexcusable, and I'm saying this as somebody who once bought into the lost cause ideology. Which is also why I'm so good at calling out communists when they partake in revisionism regarding the Soviet Union or Mao Zedong's Great Leap Forward. Yeah, Kuyan, I've been there before. I use the exact same type of logic you're using. You're wrong. I don't think that simply having a wedding at a plantation necessarily makes you racist. But I don't think it's very ethical either. There are plantations all over the South and even in Louisiana, such as the Whitney Plantation, that do historically accurate tours and don't allow weddings for this reason. And all things considered, I do still believe the fact that Nottoway Plantation burnt down isn't exactly a good thing. Needless to say, Nottoway Plantation was the site of some very important history. At the same time, the way the owners managed the property was completely unethical and intellectually dishonest. I think plantation homes should be preserved, and their history should be taught accurately. For the same reason, we shouldn't demolish Dracula's castle or Auschwitz. They should remain standing. Just because a place has a dark past doesn't mean it should be destroyed, but preserved. However, based on what I've seen of what's left of Nottoway Plantation, it's not even worth reconstructing. So much of it's been destroyed, at most, maybe leave what's left standing. But the fact that the owner is talking about rebuilding it is absolutely ridiculous. This guy cares nothing about the history that this house represented. He just wants to make money off the site. It's still sad to see a piece of history burnt to the ground. At the same time, the history wasn't even being taught accurately. What is the point of preserving history if you're not even going to be honest about it?